Hey, this is Austin from the anime scene, and today I'm doing a visual effects breakdown of Naruto's iconic Rasengan attack in Unreal Engine 5. What you see here was the final shot straight out of Unreal's movie render queue. This is the first in a series of anime attack vignettes that I'll be doing in Unreal, and I thought the Rasengan was a great place to start. So let's jump into Unreal to see how this was constructed. Alright, so now that we are in Unreal, I first want to just go over what the scene is and how I laid everything out in here. Like I mentioned in the intro, these are just smaller vignettes to show off the visual effects kind of front and center. So if I jump out of this camera that I used to render that initial shot, you can see that all this scene is are the particle systems, the alpha cutout of Naruto, and a simple plane for the backdrop. When I go back into my camera, you can see that it actually ended up layering pretty nicely. So in the two folders that I have in here, I have a lighting folder and a VFX folder. The lighting folder, there's not much to it. I do have a skylight to light the scene because the alpha cutout of Naruto is using a lit material. Just because I knew that I wanted to have a point light attached to the visual effects here. As far as the rest of it goes, I have an exponential height fog, and it's really just to get the volumetric fog for the scattering on that point light. And then a simple post-process volume, and I think the only thing I'm using in the post-process volume is chromatic aberration, just because I love to put a little bit on everything. In the visual effects folder, this is where the Niagara systems live, as well as the meshes that I'm using for these kind of windstream effects that spiral around the core. And the main reason that I have these just kind of living out in the scene as opposed to either doing them in a blueprint or in the Niagara systems themselves is just because I'm doing these smaller vignettes, and it was a lot easier to compose for the shot if I had them just living out here in the scene so that I could adjust them really quickly. And just as far as the rest of the stuff in the scene, this is the backdrop, the plane that I had mentioned. It's using just a simple radial gradient that lerps between some colors, and the alpha cutout of Naruto. The rest is just camera and rendering stuff. But to dig into the effects a little bit here, I'm going to go into this first Niagara system for the backdrop stuff, and you can see that it's just two emitters here, one for the leaves and one for the speed lines. So if I rotate here, you can see that as it is in the scene. For the leaves, I believe I started with the blowing particles template. Yeah, blowing particles. It's always nice when you don't have to make things completely from scratch, and that one has some really nice kind of natural wind drag behavior. I believe all I really had to do to this was just to control that drag and stuff a little bit more, just so it fit the composition of the shot. And then for the speed lines, these are just normal sprites that I'm aligning to velocity and then scaling by that velocity, so you get some cool streaks. This is really the main Niagara system here. In here, you can see I have a couple more things. The first is, of course, kind of that iconic core of the Rasengan attack. And both the core and the wind ring, these are both meshes that I'm spawning one time. So it's kind of a performant thing to do when you're going to be spawning meshes. You can see here in the particle state, I do not kill particles when their lifetime has elapsed. So, you know, turn that off if you just want to spawn things one time. And especially for a shot like this, if I'm just rendering a video, it makes sense just to spawn that once when I simulate. But in the core, if I go into the material here, this is the instance of it. But if I drop into the graph, you can see not too bad as far as materials go. In the Fresnel section, I have just two of these, one for the outer ring and one for the kind of inner core look. They're almost identical, except I'm obviously inverting the inner Fresnel and needed some slightly different values just to kind of expand that a little bit. Adding on to that, I'm doing the spiral noise. I tried a couple different solutions for this, and even kind of as I'm recording this, I think I thought of a slightly better way to do this. But basically what I'm doing is I am taking some UV movement with a sine node, and then feeding that into a rotator, and then that into a radial coordinates. So that is getting fed into a kind of anisotropic noise texture that I have going, just to kind of take those radial coordinates and move them around really fast. Then from there, you'll see me use power nodes a lot, just to kind of control the sharpness of those lines from that texture and the color. For the world position offset noise that I have in here, I wanted to give it a little bit of a kind of volatile, unstable look. So I'm just moving the verts around with a panning texture and then multiplying that by the vertex normal. For the wind ring, again, this is just spawned one time. And the material on this, you'll see in a couple different places. I ended up getting some pretty good reuse out of this one. But you'll see that it's a panning texture, much like the wind tubes that I have spiraling around. If I go in here, you'll see that this is the panning texture. Then I have that getting masked off in the opacity with a little bit of depth fade, just because as those wind spirals were clipping through Naruto, I wanted to soften up that intersection a little bit. Then down here I have very similar world position offset noise as the core material, just because I thought it looked nice, especially for a wind kind of behavior, to give it a little bit of fluidity. For the vortex particles, that was really just, I could have done something like that in the material of the core, but especially since it was a close-up shot of this thing, I wanted to break the silhouette a little bit. So these are just normal GPU particles, and the important part here is the vortex and curl noise, just to spin it around and really contribute to that kind of high velocity look. The refraction ring was something I added for a little bit of polish, just because I saw a couple of the Naruto Storm games do this, and I thought it looked awesome. The refraction ring that I have going on here is to kind of make it feel like it was distorting the air, especially around Naruto's face. Then the mesh swipes were the last thing I added. If I go into the mesh here, just so you guys can see it, it's a plane that I just deformed and squished on the ends, and I have the UVs kind of running through here. And all I have on there is just a simple sprite going through those UVs. So those were the two Niagara systems that I wanted to go over for this. And the last thing in the visual effects folder are the two windstream kind of spiral meshes that I have going around the core. For the mesh, I can open up this first one. The two meshes that I have here are basically identical, except for some tweaks on their material instances. If I open up the mesh on this spiral, you can see that these are just tubes that I've twisted in 3ds Max, and I'm panning through the UVs from out to in, basically. And just for the sake of this vignette, just to get that rotating movement, I added that as a component here. A lot of different ways you could do that, but just because it was so easy to arrange these meshes, I threw it on the static mesh as a component. And that is about it for this effect. Again, this was just a quick breakdown video rather than a full from scratch in-depth tutorial. Hopefully in the future I'll have a little more foresight to record myself working on this stuff so that we can do more of those types of videos. But either way, let me know what you thought. This is my first one, so I'm sure many aspects of this will be a little rough. Bear with me as I figure all that stuff out. But let me know in the comments what you guys thought of this and what you guys would like to see next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.